Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas, the Great American Auto Scene Morning Edition. Hey, thanks for tuning in this morning. It's Thursday, and I thought, well, let's look at cars that their names began with T. Now, not just the models, but the actual vehicle manufacturer, and there's a number of them. Oh, of course, Tesla, Toyota, we know about those. But some of the cars that are obscure and people don't think about, the Talbot Lago. Now, Talbot Lago was and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right. My English ain't too very good, nor is my French. Talbot Lago was a French automobile manufacturer that operated from 1916 through 1959 and built some exquisite cars. The company is known for their successful high performance racing cars and for large luxury passenger cars after the Second World War. Today, Talbot's cars are becoming highly coveted, and at various auctions around the world, they are selling for high dollars. Now, I've taken a break today from working on the house to make sure that I can bring this information to you. Now, Tesla, as you know, is the electric car company in the United States. They are the guys that have put electric cars on the map, really on the map, because they make some beautiful looking cars. They're coming out with a truck soon. I've seen it. I've seen the pictures. The styling should emulate some of the excitement in their cars. They've missed the mark as far as I'm concerned. That thing looks like something a 5-year-old penned. Oh, yeah, it's got some nice, quirky, technical details, but it's ugly. I'm sorry. It is. Nothing against the powertrain. All right, we know about Toyota. Toyota's been around since the 30s, and the leading auto manufacturer out of Japan. Something that you don't hear about is a British company called Trident. They make a sports car. It was introduced in 2014. It's nice looking. Doesn't come over to the U.S. It won't meet the crash or the safety standards. TVR. Now, here's a exotic or exciting sports car or sports GT car from Great Britain, and they've had convertibles too. And there was also a version called the Griffith, which was a U.S. importer of the TVRs that put Ford V8s in them. They were cool. Cool looking cars. A friend of mine has one or had one. I haven't seen them in a number of years. Love those TVRs. They are neat. His had the Triumph 6-cylinder engine in it. Fast as can be, fully independent, and adjustable suspension. Good morning, Ellen Fox. How you doing there up in the mountains? I saw your pictures today of the deer hanging around your flowers. Oh, well. All right, there's others. Now, the Tatra. The Tatra was a world-famous car that produced, or a company that produced some aerodynamic marvels. They had a rear-engine V8 car that was so aerodynamic, and quiet, people didn't realize how fast they were going with them because they were just that smooth. There's the Thomas Flyer. Thomas Flyer was a motor company manufacturing motorized bicycles, motorized tricycles, motorcycles, and automobiles, including the 1907 Thomas Flyer Model 35 that was famous for having won the 1908 New York to Paris race. How he got across the water, I don't know, because I didn't know cars could float. Good morning, Neil and Jay, all the people that are tuning in this morning. And I keep track of that. I have to take a look at it. Now, there's other cars out there, and I'm sure I'm going to miss a few, but one of the cars that really got me interested in sports cars were Triumphs. Now, I know there's other cars, Trabant and so forth, and yeah, Tucker, and yeah, we can talk about those, but Triumph is where I want to go to today, because the first ride I had in a sports car was with a cousin of mine who had a Triumph TR2 or TR3. I don't remember. I was 5 years old. I couldn't see over the dashboard, but the sounds, the feeling of being in that car, the acceleration. And I got to remember, when I was 5 years old, it was a long time ago, and I had never been in anything that small. My dad had a 51 Studebaker, and then a 53 Dodge. So getting into a Triumph sports car was something amazing. Now, I don't remember if it had seat belts back at the time, but chances are it didn't. I could barely see over the dashboard, but I saw the telephone poles and the light poles and such passing by. You felt every bump, every crack in the road. The engine noise was exciting and came right through the firewall. There was no sound deadening in these cars at all. That was also the first sports car I purchased when I had the chance. Good morning, Steve Jarvis. How are you doing this morning? And Mark McGeorge. So the history of the Triumph Company started out in 1885. The company was originally the importer of bicycles into Great Britain from Europe. I have one of their bicycles, but it's not from the 1800s. It's more like from the 60s or something. It's a 10-speed bike. It says Triumph, and I haven't ridden it in decades. It's hanging from the rafter in my garage, and I probably will never get rid of it. No, who knows? But I've got it just because it's a Triumph. All right, so the first Triumph I had was the TR3. TR3 and TR2 look pretty much the same, difference in the grille. The early TR2s had a very small mouth grille. First TR3s had that same grille, but then opened it up and made it broader. And it was powered by a 1900cc engine from the Standard Corporation. Now, Standard, Triumph, and the history of the companies merged quite closely together. The TR3 was a very sporting car. It didn't have windows. It had a windshield. It had side curtains. I found out they leaked pretty good. It was hard to get into an extent, and if you didn't get in right, the entry area of the door, right behind the door, behind you, would get you in the behind. And I found that out a lot of times and learned to get into the Triumph without hitting my bottom on the corner of the door frame. They had 15-inch wheels, narrow 165 series tires, 15s. Again, this was before the 70 series and the 60 series tires. It had 5-inch wheels, wide, so they were very narrow, but they were contemporary for the time. It had bug-eye style headlights sitting up on front of the car. They were cool. It looked good. The hood had exposed hinges, as did the trunk. The car was fun to drive, and I've had 4 of those. Loved them. Hi, Linda Carter. Good morning to you. Now, the Triumphs were also good in racing. They had excellent power-to-weight ratio. About 100 horsepower out of the 1991cc engine, and that propelled this car at a pretty good pace. Solid rear axle, independent front suspension. They were fun cars. Now, Triumph expanded their line. The TR2, TR3 lasted for quite a few years, but in 1962, the new Italian-designed TR4 was released. Now, it used the same basic chassis that was used in the last TR3s, TR3As and Bs. The TR3A, I believe it was, got the TR4 chassis, which had a little bit more refinement, a little bit solid, more solid, although Triumphs were a pretty solid car at the time. The TR4 also had a better body design. It was more aerodynamic. It was a brick. TR3 had a sloping nose, TR4 slightly sloping. But the TR4 also had a Targa version, or they called it a Surrey top. And this was the center section of the roof that would pull away. The TR4 had roll-up windows, very novel idea. Now, that's one thing. The TR3 and the TR4 heaters never kept up with the temperatures, but they had a heater. They had wipers. They had no power steering. TR3 directional signal was right on top of the steering wheel. It wasn't on the side. It was a little lever you push back and forth. TR3 became more, or TR4 became more conventional in that respect. Radios, well, I had one in my TR3. You couldn't hear it, but I had one. TR4 was a little more quiet. It was more solid. The body was a little bit more rigid. It was a nice car, and it stayed pretty much in production until its replacement, the TR6. Now, there were different variations of the TR4 body design, and the body stayed pretty much the same, but in the latter years, the TR5 actually was powered by the 6-cylinder engine that ended up in the TBR and in the TR6. Now, another Triumph I had was the GT6. Now, this was based on the Spitfire platform, but was a fastback, and it had a little 2-liter 6-cylinder engine in it. I loved that little car. It was claustrophobic as can be, but you know what? I'd love to have one again. And my friends, we used to call them the poor man's Jaguar because that little six-cylinder was spirited, especially in the GT6 body, which was relatively lightweight. You got to remember the Spitfire, which was a two-seat sports car, lower-level, entry-level sports car that was produced alongside with the TR4, was powered by a four-cylinder engine. And I can remember those were spirited little cars with independent rear suspension. It was a very advanced car for the time, and it was inexpensive. You could get into a TR Spitfire for less than $2,000 when they came out, and that was a bargain. It was good on gas, had good power, roll-up windows. It was a small car, and it was Triumph's ability or vehicle to compete against the Sprite and Midget from MG and Austin Healey. The TR6, same chassis as the TR4, six-cylinder engine. As a matter of fact, I think the doors were even the same from the TR4, but it had the inline six-cylinder engine. It had better body styling. I love the TR6, and that is another one of those cars that's on my bucket list, and someday, maybe, who knows, we'll try. Anyone want to trade a Corvette for a TR6? Love to do it. Even a GT6. Yeah, I like Triumphs. Now, one thing about the Triumphs, though, is they were very raw. They were sensory excitement. Now, I've had MGs, and an MG is a quiet car in comparison to the TRs. Excuse me one second. The TRs were noisy. The TRs were a solid car, but you got all the wind noise, you got all the engine noise, you got all the mechanical noises through the chassis and the body of the car. The MG, a unibody vehicle, was quieter, felt more solid, didn't have the performance that the TRs had, but if you were looking for a mundane daily driver, and I don't want to say mundane because they were fun to drive as well, I've had a few of those, they were a completely different car. Four-cylinder, they did get a six-cylinder for a while, the MGC. They even got a V8, MGB GT. But so did the Triumph. The TR7 came out, and it was a wedge-shaped car. Very stylish for the time. And there were even plans of making a fastback version of the TR7, calling it the Lynx. I saw pictures of that, and I was waiting for that to come out because the chopped, flat rear portion of the roof on the TR8 kind of made it look unfinished to me. It was a two-seater. A buddy of mine had one. Easy to work on, and you had to a lot. But it was what it was. And the TR7 was still a decent car. It just didn't meet the expectations of sports cars for the time. And with the dollar against the British pound changing, the TR7 became an expensive vehicle that was not the most reliable around. The TR8, now using the same basic Buick V8. That's right, Rover bought the rights to the Buick aluminum V8, 215 cubic inches. They improved it, they changed it, they used it for decades in many different cars. The MGB GT V8 and the TR8. TR8s are coveted now. I'd love to have one of those as well. That's a poor man's Cobra. But I gotta find one. The other thing about them that I really didn't care or don't care for today is I got accustomed to air conditioning, and they just, roll down the windows, open, drop the top, and you've got air conditioning. That's about the British answer to air conditioning. But Triumphs were great. The Spitfire, MK1, MK2s were fun. The GT6, neat car. There were also some Triumphs that didn't really make it all that well. The Triumph Stag, 1971, 72 era, had a V8 engine. It was their design. It wasn't the most reliable, and the styling was kind of quirky with a semi-Targa assembly with a roll bar on it. It was kind of neat. Good morning, Larry. How are you doing? Dennis Burnham. But it was still a Triumph. And it was an expensive Triumph, too, at the time, which was another one of its demises. They had some specialty vehicles, the 1960 Triumph Italia 2000 GT, Italian design, beautiful looking car, reminiscent of a kind of a small Ferrari, but it was a Triumph. Now, Triumph went away because of well, mergers and acquisitions and so forth over the years. The Standard Triumph Company was bought by Leland Motors in 1960. And initially, what had happened was the Standard Corporation, or Standard Motor Corporation, was an engine supplier to Jaguar. They got into a battle with the guys at Jag, Sir Lyons, the owner of Jaguar, and stopped supplying engines to him. They decided they were going to come up with a car to compete against Jaguar. Well, that all went away when Jaguar failing and Standard failing were absorbed by British Leland and became part of the same company. Now, Jaguars, as we know, are a very fine luxury machine owned by the Indians. Yes, Indians. Real Indians. Yes, yes, those guys. Rover is a Rover group, still part of Britain, but BMW owns the Triumph name nowadays. Yeah, they bought it when they bought Rover. Imagine that. So the Germans have really expanded their capturing of car brands. Now, one of the little cars that doesn't get much notice from the Triumph was when they came out with a kind of a mundane grocery getter, two-seat. I can't call it a sports car because it really wasn't. It was the Triumph Herald with a 948cc engine. It could get out of its own way on a downhill, and if you missed a shift, the pedestrians would pass you. It was kind of a boxy little car, not a sports car by any stretch of the imagination. They had the Triumph Vintessa MK2. It was kind of like a Herald with muscle. I believe it got the 6-cylinder engine, the same as the GT6 got the 2-liter. They had some great cars. The Spitfire is very well liked among sports car enthusiasts, and it was an advancement over its competition, the MG Midget and the Austin Healey Sprite, in that it had 4-wheel independent suspension, the whole front hood tilted forward, you had easy access to the engine and the mechanicals, easy to work on because you had to. The latter ones, with a 1500cc engine and a single carburetor, plus the door guard beams and the big bumpers and so forth, weren't the quickest around and a little heavy and slow, especially with the emission situation. But Triumph, as we know it, closed the doors after the TR8. And it's a sad statement of the British motoring companies because Brits were the most imported cars until the Japanese really took hold. And the British cars, the British automotive industry was an amazing industry. And it was big. It was full of different brands and excitement in car building. As a matter of fact, it's because of the British that America got the Corvette and the two-seat Thunderbirds. They were trying to capture the market that was starting to come into this country with luxury and exciting two-seat sports cars. The Jaguars, the Triumphs, the MGs, the Singers, Sunbeams. They were all coming into the U.S. after servicemen were serving over in Europe and started bringing them over. Even Porsche decided to get involved with it, thanks to Max Hoffman, by coming up with the Speedster. So sports cars, we can blame on the Brits. They're the ones that came out with them. They're the ones that perfected them. And unfortunately, they're the ones that are really no longer making them. But the Triumph sports car, I still have a soft spot in my head for them. Check it out. Check out the Triumph line of sports cars. They were exciting. They were fun. They were affordable. Not anymore. But, hey, it's relatively speaking today's dollars. Triumph Motor Company. It'll go down in history as one of America's favorite sports cars. I think so. I hope you do too. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to support the people at Service Tech, Moon, Eyes, Irwindale Speedway, Drag Strip, Valley Head Service, and more. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. Thanks for tuning in. Check us out on Facebook, on YouTube. This will be on YouTube in just a little bit, so if you happen to miss this edition of it, it'll be there. Now, if you drive it in your car or you don't have time to watch, not a problem. It'll be on Anchor FM in just a couple of minutes as well, and then Apple iTunes and a host of others, including, well, just about everything. GAAS, the Great American Auto Scene, your award-winning car show about automotive trivia and fun facts. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you or have you listen to me soon.